Hello everyone, I am Daphne Dayan P. Carino and I'm going to discuss language change. So, what is language change? Language change refers to the evolution of language over time. It can involve changes in pronunciation, grammar, vocabulary, and usage. Concepts of language change. So, a given language is inherently flexible and creative, which makes it highly prone to change. For example, contemporary readers can still understand much of Shakespeare's English, but words like pigeon livered may need interpretation through context. So linguists study these changes in a field called historical linguistics, also known as the diachronic linguistics, which examines how languages evolve across different historical stages. So these contrast with synchronic linguistics, which analyzes language at a fixed point in time. For instance, a synchronic study might examine how Americans use English today, while a diachronic study would trace how sentence structures have changed over the time of centuries. Next, let's have the origin and evolution of human language. So the origin and evolution of human language is one of the most fascinating but also most debated topics in linguistics. So there are several theories that have been proposed. First is the bow wow theory. So the bow wow theory suggests humans began language by mimicking natural sounds like meow or boom. So however, this explains a small portion of vocabulary and not the complexity of grammar or syntax. Another idea is that the vocal language came from emotional cries like pain or joy, but again, we don't have evidence showing how these cries evolved into full languages with grammar. Another is a popular theory in the gestural language, or the communication through hand signals. It may have come before vocal language, but we still don't know how or why gestures were replaced by speech. Then next, the functional theories. It proposed that language developed for practical reasons, like coordinating group tasks. However, even complex group activities like hunting wolf packs can be done without language. So finally, the brain size increased over time. Studies shows that intelligence alone doesn't explain language. Like the dolphins and primates, they have large brains, but they lack a complex language system. So next, let's have the reconstruction of Indo-European and the natural language change. So we have the similarities among language. In the 19th century, scholars noticed similarities among European languages like German and French. Filippo Sassetti in 16th century noted similarities between Sanskrit and Italian. So Leibniz observed grammatical similarities between the Persian and the German. Then Sir William Jones of 1786 formally proposed the Latin, Greek, and Sanskrit originated from a common source. So these similarities were not coincidental. They revealed a shared ancestry, leading to the reconstruction of a common ancestor. Alright, so let's explore how linguists study similarities between languages in order for us to uncover the historical relationships. So this process is key to reconstructing languages like Proto-Indo-European, which has left no written records. So first is the possible genetic relationship. So we see in the language 1 or the language A, which is the Spanish, and C is the Sanskrit. They share several similarities in their numerals 1 to 10, as we can see. So for example, in Spanish, they have the uno, Spanish or the language A. Okay, they have uno, and Sanskrit in language C is eka or tres. So these similarities in sound, structure, and meaning suggest a common ancestry. This only supports the idea of a genetic relationships, meaning both languages likely descended from a shared ancestor language, possibly a Proto-Indo-European. Now let's have the chance resemblance. So let's see the language B or the Algonquian. So the Algonquian, they say that bang. And in the Gaelic or the language A, they say that panem. But in English, or the meaning of that is woman. And these resemblances could be purely coincidental. They sound alike and mean the same things, but there's no historical evidence linking the two languages. Now, the borrowing. So we see Latin words and their English equivalents, like the planta and plant, coppa and cup. So, as we can see in Latin, they say that planta, and in English we say that plant, right? So these similarities are not, again, coincidental, or this is not accidentally, or it's not inherited. They are due to borrowing, where English is adapted many Latin words, especially during the Norman invasion of Renaissance. Right. Now let's have the reconstruction of Indo-European and the nature of language change, which is the borrowing. So borrowing is the process where one language takes words from another. English has borrowed many words related to food, culture, and technology. Borrowed words are different from inherited words, which are passed down through and shared ancestral language. The course when speakers of one language adapt words from another. Example, from Japanese to English, words like the karate, sushi, then the Latin to English like kappa, cup. So these words are not inherited from a shared linguistics ancestor, but they are adapted from another language. Right, the next is the chance overlap in sound and meanings. So sometimes words in different languages sound similar and have the same meaning purely by coincidence. Many languages share basic sounds like M, N, T, P, K in the vowel, like the A, E, and O. So human languages tend to use simple common sounds and have words for shared human experiences. So while they look and sound similar, this is usually not enough evidence to prove the connection. No regular sound patterns or systematic similarities exist, which are crucial for providing historical links. The example, in linguistics, chance overlap refers to situations where words in different languages resemble each other in both sound and meaning, but not because of borrowing or genetic relationship. These similarities might lead people to believe the language are related. Let's move on to establishing genetic relationship among languages. So the linguists use the comparative method to determine if languages are genetically related, meaning they came from the same ancestral language. So this involved comparing basic vocabularies like similar in meaning and similar in pronunciation or similar in form. So this one, the comparative and phonological correspondence. In comparative method, so these examples, you can see, this example shows that English T often corresponds to D in Latin, Greek, and Sanskrit. So these are not random, they occur systematically. So the genetic relationships among language are confirmed when regular sound changes appear across a large number of basic inherited words. So Grimm's law outlines how certain consonant sounds in older Indo-European languages, like the Latin or Sanskrit. It changed in a regular way in Germanic languages like English and German. So these changes were not random, but it is followed as a systematic pattern. let's have the correspondences between languages in Grimm's law. So the correspondences between languages show how certain consonants change from Latin, Sanskrit to English. And now let's have the changes in Grimm's law. So the changes can be grouped in three main stages. We have the voice stops, the voiceless stops. We have the voiceless stops to voiceless fricatives. And we have aspirated voice stop to voice stop. So these regular changes help explain why related words in Latin, Sanskrit, and English have different sounds and sometimes slightly different meanings. Alright, so like in Latin, the decim, in English it is 10. So as you can observe, the decim, the D in Latin becomes T in English, becomes 10. That is what Grimm's law, from D to T. Then we also have P in pattern to English father, from P to F. But they have the same meaning, which is father. And we also have the aspirated voice stop to voice stops, which is the Sanskrit brother, the BH of brother to brother in English, from BH brother to B brother in English. So the importance of Grimm's law in linguistics is it helps trace the genetic relationship between languages. It shows that sound change is regular, not random. It also explains why many English words look or sound different from Latin or Greek. It also supports the idea of a common ancestor language in Proto-Indo-European. Alright, now let's have the Indo-European language family. So the origin of the Indo-European family is still debated. The Indo-European was a group of dialects, not one unified language. No ancient language was primitive or undeveloped. Linguists identify language relationship by comparing words, forms, and sound patterns. The spread of Indo-European languages is tied to human migration. So the scholars proposed two main hypotheses where Proto-Indo-European was spoken. So the two theories are Kargan hypothesis and Anatolian hypothesis. They have different Indo-European dialects evolved separately over time. Example, the Latin and Sanskrit are both Indo-European, but they were never exactly the same. They are just related. And all languages, ancient or modern, they are equally complex and capable. Example, the Indo-European languages like Sanskrit and Latin had full grammar system. They are rich in vocabulary and they are also expressive. However, no one tolerant language is identical to the original Indo-European, but each preserves parts. Example, the Sanskrit. It keeps many consonants close to the original like DH, DH, helping in reconstruction. So, as human migrated, their language has changed and spread across regions. Based on modern genetics and archaeology, human migrated out of Africa for 6,000 years ago, and the Indo-Europeans spread likely for over the 6,000 years via resettlement. So even if the sound change, they do systematically allowing reconstruction. So a reconstructed form is not directly recorded but inferred based on patterns. The Indo-European languages are grouped into branches based on similarity. So example, the father, English father. In Sanskrit that is pater, in Greek that is pater, and in Latin also that is pater, and in Proto-Indo-European that is also pater. Then in the word three in English, three. In Sanskrit that is trias, in Greek that is tres, in Latin that is tres, and in Pi or Proto-Indo-European, that is Tres. So each branch represents a set of related languages with a common sub-ancestor. Right, so why languages change and how language change spread. So now let's explore why and how languages change over time. Linguists have found that the exact causes are still not fully understood, but for the sake of clarity, we can break it into two categories, which is the individual and a community change. So we'll focus on community change here. The community change refers to how changes in language are transmitted and shared among a group of speakers. It is not just one person using a new form of word, it is how the change catches on and spreads throughout the community, eventually becoming the norm. So for example, if a group of people starts using a simpler or shorter version of a word, and that version spreads through daily conversation, like media or education, so it can replace the older form. Over time, the whole community may adapt the change and it becomes part of the language evolution. So this process highlights the dynamic and social nature of language. It changes not just because of individual innovation, but because a whole group of people adapts and normalizes those innovations. Let's have the individual change. What is individual change? So the individual change refers to when one person on their own makes a change in how they speak the language. So this often happens without any outside pressure, and it is usually subconscious. So if this change is picked up by others, later it may eventually become part of the community's ways of speaking. But it starts with one speaker. So this is a grammar simplification in English. So modern English once had more irregular plurals like live becoming lives. So this involved changing the final sound from voiceless to voiced, like from F to V to V. So however, not all words follow this anymore, because speakers today, they often regularize these regular forms. For instance, instead of saying handkerchiefs, many now says handkerchief, just adding an S. Similarly, hooves becomes hoofs. So this shows how individual speakers tend to make language easier and more predictable. Okay. Alright, next let's have the community change. Language spreads wave-like through communities. When a language change occurs, it rarely stays in one place. Instead, it spreads gradually through contact with neighboring speakers. So it is like a ripples in water. So this wave-like diffusion allows linguistic innovation to move across regions. The neighboring group influence each other's speech. So as speakers from neighboring areas interact, they adapt each other's speech features. Over time, this can cause new pronunciation patterns, grammatical constructions, or vocabulary to appear in more than one community. Alright? And in role order affects pronunciation outcomes. So the order in which rules apply is crucial. If two roles affect the same sounds, the consequences can produce different results. A change that happened before, another might block or modify it, so leading to distinct pronunciation. Alright, then we have the geographical separation can lead to different language charges. So if group speakers become separated by geography or social barriers, they may evolve their speech independently. Over time, this can cause the same language to split into distinct dialects or even new languages. So language can affect pronunciation, vocabulary, and grammar. While this example focuses on pronunciation, the same process applies to this. Have phonological rules in Canadian English, the flap rule and the vowel centering. So in flap rule, this rule says that when a T or D sound is placed between two vowels in a word, and both vowels belong to the same rhythmic unit or metrical foot, the T or D becomes a flap. So what is a flap? A flap is a quick tap of the tongue against the roof of the mouth. It sounds like a soft D. When we hear that, it sounds like a soft D. Just like in batter. Instead of pronouncing it a clear T, batter, many Canadians say batter, sounding like batter. Okay? Then in vowel centering, this rule affects certain diphthongs. Those are the complex vowels. Okay? When these diphthongs occur before voiceless consonants, they change to more centralized vowels. Geographic spread of intersecting rules. This model showing how two different language changes or rules spread geographically across communities. Rule A starts on the left and spreads to the right. Then the rule B starts on the right and spreads to the left. So the circle represents waves of influence like gyros or stone in a water. So the farther the circle, the more distant the influence has spread from the origin. So the point X is closer to area A. So rule A arrives there first. Later, rule B or the 12B also reaches it. So the point Y is closer to area B, so rule B arrives first. So even though both points eventually get both rules, the order in which they arrive changes the pronunciation. Alright, so now let's proceed to spread of changes among different languages. So language changes can spread across different adjacent languages. The phonological features like uvular R can replace sounds. Example, the tongue tip R. So the Native American languages in Washington show shared phonological changes despite being unrelated. Example, the loss of nasal consonant and the change to voice stops. So language names may not reflect actual pronunciation due to varying from neighboring groups. So the language change doesn't happen within one language over time. It can spread across different languages, especially those in close contact. So a great example is the spread of the uvular R in Europe. This is an R sound producing farther back in the mouth and has replaced the older tongue tip R in many. Now let's have the language change. Is it a decay or improvement? So language does not mean decay or improvement. It has often been viewed in two extreme ways. They say it is a decay or it is an improvement, but research shows it's neither. Language change is natural and often maintains balance in grammar and expressions. So despite this simplification, we can still clearly understand sentence rules. So rather than thinking of language change as a good or bad, we should understand that it is a process of adaptation. That language change, but their power to express the thought and ideas remains strong. Right? Now let's have the linguistic history of English. So the English is a Germanic language influenced by invasions from tribes like the Saxons and Jutes. So these groups displaced Celtic languages in much of what became England, and the Old English dialects there were several dialects like in West Saxon becoming dominant. It is much like modern regional dialects in the US. They differed mostly in pronunciation and some grammar, but the Old English used many inflectional endings to indicate a grammatical feature such as a case, number, and a gender. Now let's have the word for word. So let's look at this. So let's look at an example of how Old English differs from modern English in structure and vocabulary. So we can see in this Old English, this one, the example, even though the sentence might look unfamiliar at first, you can already recognize some words that resemble their modern forms like whose or house, tune or town, and earls or earl. So now, let's give a word-for-word modern English translation. In the town were the house and the chamber of the earl. So this helps us see that while some of the vocabulary has stayed similar, the grammar has changed a lot. Now let's take a look at the three categories: nouns, adjectives, and verbs. So this one. Old English nouns, adjectives, and verbs had complex inflectional endings. The grammatical features like case, number, gender, and tense were shown by words endings. Example: first, the noun sini, one, which means king, changes depending on case and number. Then the word in adjective, we have the God, meaning good based on gender, number, and case. So they can say, for example, have the Goda in masculine nominative singular. Then code is both feminine and neuter nominative singular. Then we also have the verb, which is daman, meaning to judge. It has different endings for a person and tense. Alright, now let's have the linguistic history of English, the lexical change. So the lexical addition refers to the process of adding new words to language's vocabulary. From Old English to today, English has consistently absorbed words from any other languages, like pork, beef, so which added to rather than replace native Old English terms like swine, cow, sheep. So these borrowings show how English grows by expanding its vocabulary through natural or through cultural contact, trade, and learning. Next, we have the lexical change of loss. So this lexical loss refers to when words that were once used in English fall out of use. Example is the Old English word were, which meant man. So although it's no longer used on its own, it is still survived in the compound word werewolf, which means man's wolf. Alright, next, the lexical change. So lexical change is a major type of language change where a word's meaning shift over time. This can happen in several ways. So we have the narrowing, broadening, and metaphorical extension. Now let's discuss the narrowing. So narrowing happens when a word that once had broad meaning becomes more specific. So broadening is the opposite. A word's meaning expands to cover more than it originally did. Metaphorical extension, it occurs when a word is used figuratively. Then let's have the semantic change and semantic field. For instance, in English, birds named like goose, cuckoo, and pigeons, it all talk on metaphorical meanings like foolish or cowardly around the same period. So this suggests that their shared category as birds influence how their meanings develop together. Also, antonyms like hot and cold can change in tandem. Hot news means something current and breaking, while cold case refers to an old or unsolved investigation. So next, let's have the phonological change, rule addition. So the rule addition refers to new phonological rules that emerge in language over time. These rules affect how sounds are produced. So this change explains why English spelling often doesn't match pronunciation because the sound changed but the letters didn't. We have imitation or I am loud, a historical phonological rule in English. So this rule changed how vowels were pronounced. When a high front sounds like I or J followed in the next syllable, it is often applied to plural forms of nouns. So example, in Old English, instead of adding just S to form plurals, a vowel shift occurred. Like the plural of goose is geese due to imitation. Let's have the change in role applicability. So in Old English, the voiceless fricatives F or S becomes voice between vowels. Plural endings as triggered voicing in fricatives final nouns like the wife to wives. The rule was phonological. It applied automatically based on sound environment. Then in modern English, voicing is morphological. It applies only to a certain memorized words. This one, not all nouns follow the pattern anymore. Example, roof to roofs, not roofs. So right next, let's have the differences in phonemic inventory. Addition of phonemes. So in Old English, the sound B didn't exist as a separate phoneme. It appeared only as a allophone or a voiced version of F. Next, let's have the loss of phonemes. So in transition from Old English to Modern English, some phonemes were lost, especially certain front rounded vowels. The two important vowels O and Y underwent loss of roundings, meaning till they were no longer rounded with producing them. Then, let's have the morphological change, the rule addition and the rule loss. So one example of morphological rule addition in English is the productive use of the suffix able. So for instance, words like doable or able to be done, and washable or able to be washed. In Old English, there was a productive morphological rule where causative verbs could be formed by adding the suffix "yan" to adjectives. For example, the verb ridden, meaning to cause, to be, or make run. It came from this older rule. The "and" ending in ridden is a reflex of the older "yan" causative suffix, where an old productive rule is no longer part of the grammar. Then next, let's have the morphological change. So the rule change. In Old English, the ing suffix wasn't just used to form gerunds like in Modern English. Example, singing from sing, but it was also added to a large number of nouns. However, in Modern English, this usage has changed. The ing suffix is now limited to a smaller group of nouns, typically meaning material used for, such as roofing, carpeting, and flooring. So this reflects a morphological rule change where the rule still exists but has become more restrictive in its application. Next, let's have the auxiliary verb versus main verbs. So this one, the syntactic change, the rule addition and the rule loss. So in the history of English language, the syntactic rule have also changed over time. One notable example of syntactic rule addition is the particle movement rule, which did not exist in Old English but is now standard part of the Modern English. This rule allows a verb particle like out in throughout. So this shift position in a sentence. For example, in modern English we say, John threw out the fish, or John threw the fish out. Both are grammatical correct and mean the same things. However, in Old English, such as flexibility in word order was not possible. Sentences like this would have followed stricter word order rules and would allow for this kind of particle movement to the language families of the world. So the language families are group languages that evolved from a common ancestor. A good example is the Indo-European family, which includes English, Hindi, and Spanish. So although there are thousands of languages, they can be grouped into large families. For example,